It was a simple conversation. At least that's what I thought at first. I was just sitting there minding my own business, trying to enjoy the quiet of the evening when I overheard something that would tear my life apart. I heard Jessica's voice, clear as day, sharp and cold, cutting through the air. "Get out of here. You do not belong here." The wedding march was still playing, the kind of soft music meant to carry you into a dream. But for me, it shattered my world in an instant. I froze. I didn't know what to do. 150 people in that grand hall had stopped whatever they were doing and just stared. And there I was, right in the middle, a stain on a white tablecloth, like I didn't even belong. My son Kyle stood behind her, stunned, like he'd just been slapped in the face. And I just nodded. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. As I turned to walk away, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just a cold emptiness in my chest. It wasn't about what Jessica had said or how humiliating it was in front of all those people. It was the look in my son's eyes that tore through me. He didn't even have the courage to meet my gaze. I realized then he had forgotten everything. The promise I made to my wife, Helen, all those years ago was slipping away. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about something deeper, something more painful. I was Frank Mason, 58 years old, an electrician. A man who built his life with his own two hands, no fancy degrees, no high society, no business cards, just sweat, work, and a love for his family. I raised Kyle to know the value of hard work, but I guess somewhere along the way he learned to forget it. I stood outside, my coat feeling heavier with every step. I didn't belong in that world, never did. That Riverside Country Club where the wedding was held, I was out of place from the start. People in Armani suits, gold watches, talking over their wine glasses, making me feel like I didn't even deserve to be there. I'd worn my $300 suit, same one I wore to Kyle's graduation. The one Helen bought me, the one that had seen me through all the important moments of my life. But no one else saw it that way. Jessica didn't, Kyle didn't. And that's when I knew. I knew that all the years I had spent building a life for my family, all the hard work, all the sacrifices, meant nothing to them. In her eyes, I was just some stain on the perfect life she was trying to build with my son. Before I left, I paid half of the party expenses like a good father would. Kyle had asked, "Dad, Jessica wants everything to be perfect." I didn't question it. Perfection was never in my world, but I understood what it meant to give, even when you had nothing left to give. But Jessica didn't see it that way. She saw money, not effort. To her, my money, my sweat, my sacrifices, everything I had worked for was just a tool for her to get what she wanted. I left that night with a heavy heart but a mind made up. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was numb. But I also knew that the lesson had just begun. You see, there are moments in life when you realize things aren't as they seem. When you think you know a person and then, just like that, they reveal who they really are. And that night, Jessica and Kyle had shown me exactly who they were. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had even risen. The old habit kicked in, years of waking up early, of grinding through the day before most people even opened their eyes. I made a strong black coffee, sat down at the table in my old, creaky chair, and stared at the photo someone had sent me. It was a picture from the wedding. Jessica laughing, surrounded by her college friends while I stood in the distance, barely visible. The back of my gray jacket, slightly hunched, was all that could be seen. I laughed softly. That was probably the moment she felt the most shame. When she looked around and saw me, an old man in a $300 suit, standing there like I didn't belong. But it wasn't about me anymore. It was about what came next. It was about teaching Kyle a lesson, one he wouldn't soon forget. I took a sip of that cold coffee, and for the first time in years I felt a burning resolve growing in me. The promise I made to Helen was still alive, and I wasn't about to let my son forget it. I wasn't going to let Jessica, or anyone else, disrespect me or what I had built. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Now, if you want to know how things unraveled the way they did after that night, stay tuned. Because trust me, the real lesson was just about to begin, and it would come with a price. The morning after the wedding, I sat in that old chair, the one that creaked every time I moved, and stared at my phone. That picture from the wedding was still open. Jessica's face, her laugh, her smile so perfect, and me just an outline in the background. I didn't even recognize the person I saw in that photo. Was I really that invisible to them? Was I that disposable? Helen always said, when a child forgets gratitude, let them learn again, but let them learn at a cost. Well, I was about to make Kyle learn that lesson, and there would be no easy way out. I pushed the thought away for a moment. I knew what I needed to do. It was time to act. I couldn't just sit back and let this betrayal go. I wasn't going to let them make a fool of me. No, not after everything I'd done. And I wasn't going to let Kyle forget the values that shaped him, the values I worked so hard to instill in him. But how could I do it? How could I make him understand? I thought back to the days when he was just a boy, following me around the shop, handing me tools, learning how to fix the things we used every day. I thought back to when he begged me to teach him how to be an electrician. He didn't want to be a lawyer or a banker like Jessica's family. He didn't want to live in a world of high society, of ivory towers. He wanted to be like me, and I let him. But now, with his wedding behind him, I saw a different person. A man who was already looking down on me, who had traded his roots for the glittering promises of a world he couldn't even begin to understand. And all for a woman who would never accept me for who I was. I stood up, the chair creaking beneath me, and made my way to the kitchen. I poured myself another cup of black coffee, trying to clear my mind. It was then that the thought struck me. This wasn't just about Jessica or the wedding. It wasn't even just about me or my pride. This was about something much bigger. This was about showing Kyle that family wasn't something you could just toss aside when it no longer suited your image. It was about proving to him that what we built, this life, this home, these values, wasn't something that could be bought or replaced with a fancy suit or a house in the suburbs. I needed to teach him what was truly valuable, and for that I needed to make a choice, a hard choice. The first thing I did was gather everything together, all the papers, the receipts, the bank statements, the photographs, everything that proved how much I had sacrificed for them, everything that showed just how much I had given to make sure Kyle and Jessica could live the life they wanted. The mortgage payments I made for their house, the money I gave for Jessica's wedding dress, the flowers, the venue. It was all there in black and white. I hadn't kept track of it all for revenge. I just did it because that's what you do for your family. But now it was time to use it. I opened my laptop, the screen flickering to life. I had a plan, and it started with a phone call. The phone call came later that afternoon. I had been expecting it, even though I didn't want to answer. It was Kyle. "Dad," his voice sounded distant, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should be calling me. I took a deep breath. "Yeah, son, it's me." I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened last night," Kyle said, his voice tight, as if he was forcing the words out. "I know things got out of hand. Jessica did mean what she said. I didn't mean for you to feel like you don't belong." I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of hearing my thoughts. I just let the silence hang there, the weight of his words sinking in. After a moment I finally spoke. "You're sorry, huh?" "Yeah, Dad, I am. I just don't know what happened. It was just so much pressure. The wedding, everything, and Jessica's family, they're not like us. They're different. They don't understand us, and I guess I just wanted to fit in." I felt my stomach turn. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. But this wasn't the time to show weakness. I had to stay calm, calculated. This was part of the lesson. I cleared my throat. "Kyle, you remember the promise I made to your mother, don't you?" "Dad, he faltered, clearly not expecting that question. "I promised her that no matter how far you went in life, no matter how high you reached, I'd make sure you never forgot where you came from. I promised her that you'd always remember the value of hard work and gratitude." I let the words hang in the air. "I haven't forgotten that, Dad. I swear I haven't." I could hear him growing defensive, but I wasn't about to let him off that easy. "It doesn't feel like it. Not last night. not when you were too embarrassed to even look at me." "Dad, that's not true." "Then why was I invisible in that crowd, Kyle?" I interrupted. "Why was I the one left standing alone while you and your new wife and her family laughed and enjoyed everything I paid for?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could feel him struggling with his words, trying to defend himself, but I knew he couldn't. He knew I was right. Finally he spoke, his voice small. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" That was it, the opening I needed. "I want you to remember what really matters. I want you to learn the lesson that I'm going to teach you. And the first step is understanding that actions have consequences." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "This is only the beginning, Kyle. This wedding, this marriage, all of it, it's a lesson in gratitude, and it's one you're going to learn the hard way." I hung up before he could say anything else. There was no more to discuss. The decision had been made. The phone call had left me feeling, well, nothing. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to get, when my blood would boil and my hands would shake. That kind of anger was easy. This was something else. This was the calm that came before the storm, the kind of quiet that made you realize how much power you had when you were finally done trying to please everyone else. It was the beginning of a lesson Kyle would never forget, and as much as it hurt, it had to be done. The next step was taking everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, and putting it in front of him. But I wasn't going to do it directly. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. No, the lesson had to unfold like a slow burn. I'd let the anger smolder quietly, just beneath the surface, until it was ready to erupt. And I wasn't going to give them a chance to run from it. That evening, I took a drive out to the outskirts of town, the kind of drive I'd made countless times in my life. The streets were quieter than usual, and the setting sun painted the sky a shade of orange that always reminded me of Helen. I thought about her, about the promise I made her on her deathbed, and about the words I would say to Kyle when the time came. I pulled into the small storage unit I had rented years ago, the place where I kept all the old tools, the ones I didn't use anymore. I hadn't thought about it in a while, but today it felt like the right time. It felt like the right place to begin. Inside the unit, I pulled out a few boxes of old receipts, invoices, and documents. Everything I had accumulated over the years, payments, investments, bills, every cent I had spent on Kyle's future, on his life. There were bank statements from when I paid his tuition, bills from when I bailoed him out of trouble, and most importantly, there was the mortgage, my mortgage. The house I built with my own 2 hands. I spread the papers out on the floor, my fingers grazing over each one, each mark reminding me of the sacrifices I had made. I remembered how much I had worked to get everything in order, how hard I had pushed myself so that Kyle could have the life I had never had. But somewhere along the way, I had lost him. Somewhere between the job, the bills, the late nights, he had become someone who was embarrassed by the very things that made him who he was. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw it all away. But I didn't. Instead, I folded everything neatly, put the stack of papers back in the box, and locked it away in the corner of the storage unit. It wasn't time yet. It would come soon enough. The next few days felt like a blur. I went about my usual routine, waking up early, working in the shop, handling the small jobs that kept the lights on. But in the back of my mind, the plan was unfolding slowly but surely. I could hear Helen's voice in my head, calm as always, reminding me that patience was key. "You know what to do," she would say. And I did. Then on the 4th day after the wedding, I got a text from Kyle. It was brief with no apologies. Just a question. "Dad, I was thinking about what you said. Maybe we should talk." I didn't reply right away. I let the message sit there unread as if it didn't matter. But of course it did. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. He was starting to crack. That evening, when I knew Jessica and her family would be at some dinner party, I called Kyle. He answered after a few rings, his voice low and hesitant. "Hey, Dad." Hey Kyle, you wanted to talk. Yeah, I've been thinking about everything and I think I messed up. I should have had your back last night. You didn't deserve that. I let him talk, giving him the space to say what he needed to. But deep down, I knew his words didn't mean much yet. The real apology wouldn't come until the lesson had been learned. Look, I said, cutting him off, you've had your chance to apologize, but words are easy. You'll understand when you realize what I've been doing all these years. You'll understand when you see the real cost of your choices. He was silent for a moment then, as if on cue, asked, "What do you mean?" "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "You're going to learn exactly what I've given you. You're going to see how much you've taken from me, and I'm going to show you just how little gratitude you've shown in return." I hung up before he could respond. The next day I knew he would come. Kyle always did when he needed something, and this time he needed to understand. When he arrived at the shop, I could see the nervousness in his eyes. He hadn't quite figured it out yet, but he would. I led him into the back room, where the boxes of papers were stacked, waiting for the right moment. I pulled one out and handed it to him. "Look at this," I said, my voice steady. "This is your life. These are the sacrifices I made so you could have everything you wanted." Kyle hesitated, then opened the box. As he went through the papers, the silence stretched on. The weight of the moment hung in the air between us. Finally he looked up, his face pale. "Dad, I had no idea." I gave him a long, hard look. "You never asked, Kyle. You never cared to know. You took it all for granted, and now you're going to see just what that cost me." Kyle took a step back, his hands shaking as he looked at the documents in disbelief. "But I didn't." "You didn't care, son. Not until now. And now you're going to learn just how much that carelessness has cost you." I let the silence speak for itself. This was the lesson. He was finally beginning to see what had been hidden in plain sight. Kyle's face was ashen, his eyes flickering from one document to the next, taking in the evidence of everything I had sacrificed. His fingers trembled slightly as he read through the pages, the realization sinking in. There in front of him was the price of everything I had done to make sure he could live the life he thought he deserved. The tuition fees, the bills I had covered, the mortgage I had paid, every single penny had been given in the hopes that he would appreciate it. But instead, he had thrown it all away for the sake of a woman who saw me as little more than a stain on her perfect world. I watched him struggle to find the right words, to form an apology that could fix the mess he had made, but there was nothing he could say. Not yet. Not until he truly understood. "You never thought about the cost, did you?" I said quietly, my voice a little softer now. "All these years, you've been so caught up in your own life, in Jessica's world, that you never stopped to think about where it all came from." He finally looked up at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "I didn't know, Dad. I had no idea you'd been doing all this for me." "No, you didn't," I agreed, my tone steady, "because you didn't care enough to ask." I let my words hang in the air. The silence between us was thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. It wasn't just about money or material things. It was about respect. It was about understanding that love wasn't just about what I could give him, but also about recognizing the sacrifices I made for him. "You know," I said, pacing slowly across the room, "I didn't expect you to understand this at 20, but I thought by the time you were married you'd see it. You'd see what it takes to build a life. I thought you'd remember how hard Helen and I worked to give you a better future, one that didn't come with strings attached." Kyle stood there completely still, his eyes glued to the pile of papers on the table, but his mind was clearly far away. I could see his wheels turning, trying to piece everything together, but he wasn't there yet. "You think it was easy, don't you? That it was all just handed to me," I continued, my voice becoming more forceful. "You think I just walked into this life. I built it brick by brick. And I thought you'd understand that, thought you'd respect it. But you let someone come between us. You let someone who doesn't even understand where you came from tear us apart." The truth of it was hitting him now, but the hurt was still there, clouding his judgment. I could see him struggling with the truth, his face flushed with confusion, regret, and a little guilt. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I stood there for a long time just watching him. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but he didn't know how. So I took the next step. It was time for him to really feel the consequences of his actions. I didn't just give you money, Kyle. I gave you everything. And you threw it all away for someone who doesn't even know how to value hard work. Someone who looked down on me as if I were nothing more than a laborer. He flinched at my words, but I couldn't stop now. It was too important. Jessica, she doesn't see me. She doesn't see the life I built for you, the sacrifices I made. And you let her treat me like I'm nothing, like I'm just some old man with no value. Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. No, no more excuses. You're going to see the full picture, Kyle, and you're going to understand what it costs when you forget your roots. I grabbed the final stack of papers, an envelope I had been saving for just this moment. It was the deed to the house I had built with my own hands all those years ago, the house that now had more memories tied to it than I could ever count. This house, Kyle, this is my legacy, my work, my sweat, and it's about to be something else entirely. I held the envelope out in front of him. This house, this life, it's no longer yours. Not unless you start showing me the respect I deserve. Not unless you understand the price of forgetting what truly matters. His eyes widened. What are you talking about, Dad? What do you mean? You'll see soon enough, I said coldly. You're going to learn exactly what happens when you betray the people who care about you, when you throw everything away for someone who doesn't even understand what it took to get you where you are. I turned away from him and went to the desk, pulling out the phone I had kept hidden. I didn't want Kyle to see the move I was about to make, not yet, but he would soon enough. With a few quick taps, I dialed the number that would change everything. The call went through, and I spoke without hesitation. Hi, yes, I'd like to speak to someone about selling my property, the one on Elm Street. Yes, I'm the owner, and I need to make arrangements to transfer it as soon as possible. The voice on the other end confirmed everything, and within minutes, the deed to my house was no longer in my hands. It was gone. When I turned around, Kyle was standing there, his face pale. What did you just do? I sold it, Kyle. I sold the house. The one I built. The one I thought would be yours someday. No, Kyle shouted, his voice cracking. You can't do that, Dad. You can't just take everything away. You never understood the value of it, Kyle, I said, my voice steady, though inside I felt a kind of sadness I hadn't known in years. You wanted this perfect life, this perfect world with Jessica and her family, but you never stopped to think about the price. Now, you'll understand what happens when you forget where you came from. Kyle stood there, his hands shaking as he tried to process what had just happened. His world was unraveling in front of him, and I knew there was no going back. This was the lesson, and it was only just beginning. The silence between us was thick, the kind of silence that suffocates you and fills the air with a weight you can almost feel pressing down on your chest. Kyle stood there, his mouth moving, but no words seemed to come out. His face had turned an unhealthy shade of pale, like the blood had drained from it in an instant. I watched him, waited for him to process the magnitude of what had just happened. You can't do this, Kyle said finally, his voice trembling. He looked like he didn't even recognize me anymore, like the man standing in front of him was the father he'd known all his life. He was staring at me like I was some kind of stranger, something unrecognizable. You can't just take the house, Dad. That was supposed to be mine. It's all I have left. The words stung, not because they were false, but because they were true. That house was his inheritance, his last tangible connection to everything I had worked for. It was supposed to be his legacy, but what Kyle didn't understand, what he couldn't understand yet, was that I wasn't taking anything from him. I was giving him the very thing he needed most, a wake-up call. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice steady but cold. That house wasn't just a building to me. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. That house was a symbol of every sacrifice I made, of every long night working to build something for you, but you never saw that. You never cared to see it. Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but I stopped him with a raised hand. I gave you everything, son, everything. I worked my fingers to the bone and I gave it all to you. And what did you do? You let some woman come into our lives and turn you against me. You traded your roots for her perfect little life, for her perfect world. You chose her over me, and you chose her over the values I raised you to believe in. You've already thrown away everything I built for you, and you still don't see it. I stepped forward, my eyes locking onto his. Now, you're going to learn what happens when you forget where you came from. You're going to learn that the world doesn't revolve around perfect weddings and fancy dresses. The world revolves around hard work, respect, and loyalty. Things you've forgotten, things I'm going to make you remember. Kyle's eyes were wide now, filled with confusion and anger, but I could see it. I could see the first flicker of realization. It wasn't enough yet. He still didn't fully understand the depth of the lesson he was about to learn, but I wasn't finished. I turned away from him, walking over to the desk where I'd placed the deed to the house. I'd already signed it over to the new buyer, a company that specialized in buying properties quickly. They were already preparing to take possession, and in less than a week, the house I had built would no longer be mine. I'd made sure of it. "Do you want to know what the price is, Kyle?" I said, turning back to face him. "The price is everything. The price is everything you thought you could take for granted. You thought your life with Jessica would be smooth sailing, didn't you? That all this would just fall into place for you. But the reality is there's no magic. There's no fairy tale. There's only hard work. And when you forget that, you lose everything." Kyle swallowed hard, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to shout, to scream at me. But there was nothing left to say. His world was crumbling in front of him, and he had no choice but to watch it fall apart. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. He had to feel it. He had to understand the weight of his actions, the consequences of his choices. And as much as it hurt me to do it, I knew this was the only way he would ever get it. The days that followed were a blur. Kyle stopped by the shop once, but he didn't come in. He just stood in the parking lot, staring at the building, like he was trying to understand what had just happened. He didn't even come to see me. I didn't reach out to him either. There was no point, not until he came to terms with it, not until he fully understood the lesson I was trying to teach him. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was seeing Jessica's face. I didn't expect her to call me, but she did. She called the next day, her voice dripping with condescension, as if she still thought she could control the situation. "Mr. Mason," she said, her tone cold and polite, "we need to talk about what happened. This isn't over." "Oh, it's over, Jessica," I said quietly. "And if you really cared about Kyle, you'd let him figure this out on his own, but you won't. You'll try to fix things. You'll try to take control again, and you'll fail." "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice rising. "This is about Kyle, not you. You're punishing him for something that wasn't his fault." "No," I replied. "I'm not punishing him. I'm teaching him. You've already done enough damage, and now it's time for him to wake up. This is his lesson, and I'm the one who's going to make sure he learns it." I hung up before she could say anything else. A week later, I received a call from Kyle. His voice was different this time, measured, softer, as though the fire inside him had been extinguished, if only for a moment. "Dad," he said, "I don't know what to say. I never understood what you did for me. I didn't see it. I didn't appreciate it." I didn't respond right away. I just let the silence stretch between us, giving him time to think about his words. Finally, I spoke. "I don't need you to say anything, son," I said. "You'll show me what you've learned when you show up with some humility, when you show me that you understand what it means to work for something, to earn something. That's when I'll know you've learned your lesson." Kyle was quiet for a long time. I could hear him taking deep breaths, trying to find the words. "I'll make it right, Dad, I promise." Kyle's words were a relief, but they didn't fix anything. Not yet. Words, after all, were cheap. Actions spoke louder than anything else. I didn't want an apology. I wanted him to show me that he understood what had happened. I wanted him to prove that he was ready to stop living in a world where nothing mattered except what looked good on the outside. Because that world wasn't real. It was a facade. And now he had to face the truth. I sat down at my old wooden table, the one that Helen and I had shared for decades, the one I had built with my own hands all those years ago. It had been the center of our life together. It had seen so many moments, from quiet dinners to long discussions about the future. It had always been there, steady and reliable, just like everything else I'd worked for, and just like the life I had built for Kyle. I hadn't heard from him in 2 days. No texts, no calls. It was exactly what I expected. He wasn't ready. He wasn't sure if he wanted to take the next step, but I knew he would have to. Sooner or later, he would have to face the reality of the choices he had made. And then, that evening, just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, I got the call. "Dad," it was Kyle's voice, quiet, almost hesitant. "Can I come by? I need to talk." I looked out the window at the fading light, the shadows of the trees stretching across the yard. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that made you feel like nothing in the world could go wrong. But I knew better. I knew that Kyle was about to face something far harder than anything he had ever imagined. "You want to talk? Fine," I said, standing up from the table. "Come by, but don't expect this to be easy." When he arrived an hour later, he didn't look like the same person. His posture was different, straight, purposeful. He walked into the house with a kind of quiet resolve, like he had finally made a decision. But I didn't say anything. I just watched him, waited for him to speak. He didn't sit down. He just stood there for a long time, looking at me, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his voice steady but low. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the sacrifices you made, about everything I've taken for granted. And you were right. I've been living in this bubble, thinking that life would just work itself out. I was wrong." I watched him carefully, waiting for him to continue. I didn't want to interrupt. I wanted to hear what he had to say. "I've spent my whole life wanting to escape from who I was," he continued, his voice growing more confident with each word. "I thought I could leave all of this behind, everything you built, and I could live in this world where everything was perfect. But I was wrong. I can't escape who I am, and I can't escape you, not anymore." The words stung, but in a way it was exactly what I wanted to hear. It wasn't enough yet, though. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I needed to see real change in him. "Go on," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "I know I've made mistakes," Kyle said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "I hurt you. I hurt Mom. And I thought that if I just ignored it, if I just pretended it didn't matter, everything would be fine. But it's not fine, not without you, not without our family." There it was, the acknowledgement, but I couldn't let him off the hook just yet. This wasn't a simple apology. This was a reckoning. "You think you've learned something, Kyle?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "You think you've realized the error of your ways?" "I do," he said, nodding slowly. "I do, Dad, and I want to make it right." I looked at him for a long time, weighing his words. Could I trust him? Could I trust that he truly understood what had happened? "Making it right isn't just about saying you're sorry," I told him, stepping closer. "It's about showing up. It's about proving that you've learned from your mistakes. And I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about respect. You lost my respect the moment you stopped appreciating what I did for you. And you lost your own respect when you allowed someone else to make you forget who you are." Kyle flinched, but he didn't look away. He knew I was right. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad," he said, his voice steady now, filled with determination. "I'll work for it. I'll prove to you that I can earn your respect back." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but I wasn't ready to believe it completely. Not yet. But something in me, something deep down, wanted to. I wanted to believe that Kyle could change. I wanted to believe that the boy I had raised, the one who had once looked up to me, could come back to the man who stood before me now. I sighed and crossed my arms, watching him closely. This isn't going to be easy, and I'm not going to just hand things back to you. You're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to prove yourself, not just to me, but to yourself. I will, Kyle said quietly. I promise. I nodded, then walked over to the desk and picked up the papers again. I handed him the envelope that had the deed to the house, the one I had sold. You want to make things right, Kyle. Then you're going to have to rebuild, just like I did. You're going to have to put in the same work I did, the same effort. And you're going to have to learn what it means to build something with your own hands. He took the envelope, looking at it for a moment before tucking it away. He didn't say anything more, but his eyes spoke volumes. Good, I said, turning away from him. We'll see what happens next, and I'll be watching. Don't think for a second that this is over. The real work is just beginning. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was looking at my son again. Not the man who had betrayed me, but the man who might just be capable of redemption. The days that followed Kyle's visit were tense. I could feel the weight of everything hanging between us, but there was something different in the air. Something shifted that night. Kyle had said he would change, and I had agreed to let him prove it. But the real question was, would he? Could he really learn what it meant to work for something, truly work for it, and not just rely on the world that had been handed to him? I had seen his face, the way his eyes had finally cleared, and I knew he meant it. But words were still words. I wasn't going to let him off easy, not after everything that had happened. It was early the next morning when the first real test came. I was out in the shop, working on a couple of old tools that needed fixing. The shop wasn't much, but it was mine. It was the place where I felt the most at peace, the place where I could lose myself in the work and not think about anything else. The smell of oil and metal, the hum of the machines, this was my world. This was where I had built my life. I wasn't expecting Kyle to show up so soon, but when I heard the familiar sound of his truck pulling into the driveway, I looked up from my work and saw him standing there in the doorway. His face was determined, and he had his sleeves rolled up like he was ready to get to work. "Dad," he said, his voice steady, "I'm ready. I want to help. I want to learn." I took in the sight of him standing there, a boy who had once been too proud to ask for help, now standing before me ready to put in the work. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. I nodded slowly, setting down the tool I had been holding. "All right, son, let's see what you've got." He walked over to the workbench, and for the first time in a long while, I could see that he was truly focused. He picked up the wrench I handed him, examining it with care, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was something in the way he handled the tools that made me realize he wasn't just doing this to prove a point. He was doing it because he wanted to. We worked together in silence for a while, the sound of metal clanking and the occasional hum of the machines filling the air. Every now and then, I would glance over at him, and for the first time, I saw him as more than just my son. I saw him as someone who was finally starting to understand the value of hard work, of doing something with your own two hands. But as much as I wanted to let that moment play out, I knew it wasn't enough. It wasn't just about fixing tools or working in the shop. The real challenge was about building a life, about rebuilding the trust that had been broken, and that wouldn't happen overnight. A few hours later, Kyle took a break, sitting on the wooden crate next to me. He wiped his brow, looking at me with a kind of tiredness I hadn't seen in him before. He had worked hard, harder than I had ever seen him work in his life, and I could tell it was starting to sink in. "Dad," he said, taking a deep breath, "I've been thinking about the house, about everything you've done for me. I don't even know where to start." I looked over at him, waiting for him to continue. "I never appreciated it, Dad, never understood what it took, and I was so focused on trying to fit in with people who didn't care about me, people who didn't understand what we had, what you built. I was so caught up in wanting to be someone I wasn't that I forgot about the one thing that mattered, you and this family. His words were raw, vulnerable, and for the first time in a long while I saw the boy I had raised, the one who had followed me around the shop, eager to learn, eager to help, the one who had looked up to me and wanted to be just like me. "You're starting to get it," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "It's not just about money or the house. It's about pride. It's about knowing where you come from and never forgetting it. You can't just walk away from your past, from the people who made you who you are. It'll catch up to you eventually." Kyle nodded, his eyes focused on the ground. He didn't say anything else for a while, and I didn't push him. He needed time to process everything. He needed time to see that this was about more than just making things right. It was about understanding the lessons I had spent years trying to teach him. The next few days were more of the same. Kyle came to the shop every morning, working alongside me, learning the trade the way I had taught him all those years ago. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, but I saw a change in him. He wasn't the same kid who had walked into the house that night, angry and full of pride. This was a different Kyle, one who was starting to understand that life wasn't about the things you could buy. It was about what you could build with your hands, with your heart. But just when I thought he had made it through, just when I thought he was ready, something happened that tested everything. It was a week later when Jessica showed up at the shop. She walked in like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. She was wearing that same cold expression she always had, the one that made me feel like she was too good for this world, too good for me. "Kyle isn't here, is he?" she asked, her voice icy. She had a way of making every word sound like it was dripping with disdain. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, waiting for her to say something. I knew why she was here. She was trying to fix things, but I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. "No, he's not here," I said, my voice calm but firm. "He's busy working, unlike you, I imagine." Jessica scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, do you? Kyle doesn't need this. He's got a future ahead of him. He doesn't need to waste his time working in this place." "I don't think you get it, Jessica," I replied, stepping closer. "Kyle is learning something he never got from you: respect. Respect for the work. Respect for the people who came before him. And most of all, respect for himself." She narrowed her eyes, clearly irritated by my words. "You're making a mistake, Frank. Kyle could do so much more with his life than this, and you're holding him back." I didn't let her get under my skin. I was done with her manipulation. "He's not holding back, Jessica. He's finally starting to figure out what really matters, and you're just upset because he's not in your world anymore." Her lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel and walking out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew that if Kyle was truly ready, he wouldn't let anyone, not even her, steer him away from the path he was now walking. The next few days were quieter than I expected. Jessica's visit didn't stir up the kind of trouble I had anticipated, but I could tell it had shaken Kyle. When I asked him about it later, he didn't say much, just that it was complicated. But I saw the look in his eyes, the uncertainty, the doubt creeping back in. He wasn't ready to let go of her entirely, not yet. But that's the thing with change. It's never easy. It doesn't happen overnight. And just when you think someone has turned a corner, they're faced with another test. A new challenge that forces them to decide whether they're going to stick to what they've learned or slip back into their old ways. It was a Saturday morning when I felt the first real sign of Kyle's commitment to this new path. We were working on a project in the back of the shop, a job that had been sitting around for a while, a broken-down generator that needed some serious work. It was the kind of job I would have done in a heartbeat by myself, but this time, I told Kyle he was doing it. He hesitated at first, glancing at the pile of old parts and the complex wiring. He wasn't sure he could do it. I could see it in his eyes, but I wasn't going to hold his hand. Not anymore. "You can do this," I said, picking up a wrench and passing it to him. "Take it step by step. Break it down piece by piece. I don't know, Dad, he said, running his hand through his hair. What if I mess it up? You will, I replied with a smile, but that's the point. You fix it, you figure it out. He sighed but then took the wrench and started working. At first he fumbled with the parts, unsure of where to start, but gradually he began to get the hang of it. I watched him from across the room, nodding quietly to myself as I saw the change in him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast, but he was trying, and that was the point. As the hours passed, the generator began to take shape. By the end of the day, it was running again, humming steadily in the corner of the shop. Kyle stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans, looking more proud than I'd seen him in a long time. I did it, he said, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. You did, I said, walking over to give him a firm pat on the back. You learned something today. That's what matters, but this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. That night, Kyle came over to the house. We didn't talk much at first, just sat together in the kitchen, sharing a quiet meal. But after a while, he broke the silence. Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about respect and about loyalty. I know I've got a lot to prove, and I'm ready to prove it, not just to you, but to myself. I looked at him carefully. He wasn't just talking about the shop or about the work he was doing. This was bigger than that. This was about the promise he had made, the one that was slowly turning into action. I'm proud of you, son, I said quietly, but I need to know something. Are you really ready to let go of that world, the one Jessica and her family want you to be a part of? Kyle paused, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He was trying to reconcile the two worlds he had lived in, one where hard work, loyalty, and respect were the foundation, and the other where appearances, status, and convenience ruled. I don't know if I'm ready to completely let go of it, he admitted, but I can't keep living like I've been. I can't keep pretending that it's all just about money or status. I've lost too much already. I don't want to lose you too. I didn't respond right away. I just let him sit with that for a while. There was a long silence between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of clarity. Finally, I spoke. Kyle, you can have both. You can have the life you want, the life you think you deserve, but you have to know where your roots are. You have to understand where you came from, and you have to respect that. Because if you don't, you'll end up just like everyone else in that world, empty, chasing after something that doesn't last. He nodded, his eyes set on me with a newfound understanding. I don't want that, Dad. I don't want to be someone I'm not. The next week, Kyle went to visit Jessica. I didn't know what was said between them, and I didn't ask. But when he came back, I could see something had changed in him. He wasn't the same person who had walked out the door a week ago, unsure and conflicted. This time, he walked in with his shoulders squared and his head held high. I ended things with her, Dad, Kyle said, his voice steady. I told her I wasn't going to live in her world anymore. It wasn't easy, but I did it, and I don't regret it. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. I could see the relief in his eyes. He had finally made the hard decision, and he had chosen the right one. You did good, son, I said, my voice rough with emotion. You did what you needed to do, and now you can move forward. You can start building a life that's really yours. Kyle smiled, a real smile this time, not one filled with uncertainty. Yeah, I can. I think I'm ready. And just like that, I knew he was. He was ready to take on whatever came next, not because he was trying to please anyone, but because he had finally found his own path. Later that night, as I sat in the old wooden chair in the living room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Kyle had made it through the hardest part, and while the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, I knew he had the tools he needed now. The same tools that had served me my whole life: hard work, loyalty, and respect. There was hope now, and for the first time in a long time I believed we could rebuild, not just the house, but the trust between us, and that in the end was worth more than any inheritance. The days following Kyle's decision to end things with Jessica were some of the most peaceful I had experienced in a long time. It wasn't just the absence of tension, it was the presence of something else. Something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I watched Kyle closely during those days. He kept coming to the shop, staying later than usual, working on projects without me needing to ask. It was clear he was putting in the effort. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. The way he carried himself was different. He was proud of the work he was doing, and for the first time I saw a glimpse of the man I had hoped he would become. One afternoon, a few weeks later, as I was finishing up some wiring on a broken-down truck, Kyle walked into the shop with a heavy bag in his hand. He was grinning like he had just made the best discovery of his life, and I couldn't help but smile back. "You're looking a little too happy for someone who's just walked into a dusty old shop," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "I've got something for you, Dad," he said, walking over and setting the bag down on the workbench. I thought it was time to make things right. I know I can't just fix everything with one gesture, but I wanted to start somewhere. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He opened the bag and pulled out a small, worn, and well-used toolbox. It wasn't much, just an old, sturdy thing with some of the most basic tools inside. But to me, it was everything. "I remember when you gave me my first one," Kyle said, looking up at me. "You said that a man's tools are a reflection of his work. I guess I never realized how much you meant by that until now. So I figured it was time to have my own set. The kind of set I can pass down." I stood there for a long moment looking at the toolbox. It was simple, practical, and for some reason that made it perfect. "It's a good set, son," I said finally, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's a start." Kyle's eyes softened as he took a step closer. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said. About the tools, about respect, about the work. I know I've got a long way to go, but I want you to know something. I'm done with the life I thought I wanted. I'm not just trying to live up to your expectations anymore. I'm trying to live up to my own." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to say something wise, something profound, but the truth was, I didn't need to. Kyle had already said everything I needed to hear. The words were simple, but they meant more than anything else. For the first time, I felt like he understood. I felt like the bridge between us was being rebuilt, piece by piece. "Well," I said finally, clearing my throat, "you've made the first step, and that's what matters." It was about a week later when the real test came. Kyle had been working harder than ever, but the pressure started to build. There was a big job coming in, the kind of work I'd usually take on myself, but this time I decided it was his turn. It was a small construction job, just a couple of buildings that needed electrical work. It wasn't anything big, but it would require attention to detail, patience, and a steady hand. I watched him as he prepared for the job. He seemed nervous, but I knew that was normal. Every new step brought its own challenges. I could see him getting ready, checking his tools, organizing everything meticulously, something that had never really come naturally to him before. As the day went on, I kept my distance, letting him take the lead. I watched from the sidelines, offering advice only when he asked. He did everything on his own, from the setup to the troubleshooting. And while I knew he was still getting the hang of things, there was something different in the way he handled it. He wasn't rushing through it. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was focused on doing the job right. By the end of the day, the job was finished. It wasn't perfect. There were a couple of mistakes here and there, but it was good enough. Better than good enough. I was proud of him, and I could see that for the first time in a long time he was proud of himself too. "You did good, son," I said as we stood together, looking at the work we had just completed. Kyle wiped his brow, exhaustion settling into his shoulders. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I don't think I've ever felt more proud of something I've done." "You should be proud," I replied, nodding. "You've earned it." Later that night, Kyle and I sat down together, sharing a quiet meal at the table. The house felt warmer, more alive than it had in years. I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. It wasn't just about the house we had rebuilt. it was about us. It was about the trust that had been broken and now was slowly being repaired. It was about the future we were both building, one step at a time. "I've been thinking," Kyle said, breaking the silence. "I want to take on more work. I want to start my own projects. I don't want to just live in the shadow of what you built. I want to build something of my own." I looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "You sure about that, son?" "I am," he said, his tone firm. "It's time." I nodded slowly, feeling a rush of pride. "I think you're ready, but remember, it's not just about what you build. It's about how you build it. The way you treat people, the way you respect the work, the way you never forget where you came from." "I won't forget," he said, meeting my eyes. "I promise." And as we sat there, sharing a simple meal, I realized something. Maybe Kyle wasn't the same person he had been when all this started. Maybe he wasn't the son I had once feared would lose his way. Maybe he had found something that was worth more than any inheritance, worth more than any house I could give him. He had found his purpose, and for the first time in a long time, so had I. The weeks following Kyle's decision to step into his own future felt like a quiet revolution. The changes in him were subtle at first, small shifts in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to people, the way he treated the work he had once dismissed as nothing more than a means to an end. But with each passing day, I saw him grow. I saw him transform into a man who understood the true value of hard work, loyalty, and most importantly, respect. We worked side by side, the rhythm of our labor becoming something like a dance. I could tell that Kyle wasn't just doing this for me anymore. He was doing it for himself. He wasn't just showing up because he had to. He was showing up because he wanted to. And it wasn't just about fixing things or completing jobs. It was about rebuilding something deeper, something more lasting than any wall or wire we could ever put together. There were moments, quiet moments, when I would catch him staring at the work we had done, a thoughtful expression on his face. And I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking about his future. He was thinking about how he was going to build his own legacy, just like I had built mine. It was one afternoon, about a month after the big job Kyle had completed on his own, when I saw him talking to a couple of young guys who had stopped by the shop. They were looking for work, and I could tell they were expecting to be treated the way most people expected to be treated by someone like me, like they were just another pair of hands to hire, just another job to get done. But when Kyle spoke to them, it was different. His voice wasn't condescending or dismissive. He was patient with them, showing them the ropes, explaining things with the same care I had used when I first started teaching him. There was no arrogance in him anymore, just a quiet strength that came from understanding. I watched from the doorway, feeling a strange sense of pride. This was my son, not the boy who once looked at me with disdain, not the young man who turned his back on everything I had worked for. This was the man he had become, a man who had earned his place in the world, and who now was willing to help others find theirs. Later, as we sat down for dinner, Kyle didn't bring up the conversation with the young men, but I knew it had made an impact on him. It had solidified something inside him, and in that moment I understood something else. His journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. The phone call came just before dinner one evening. I answered the phone, expecting it to be a client or a supplier, but when I heard the voice on the other end, I instantly recognized it. "Frank," Jessica said, her voice cool but not unfriendly. "I wanted to talk to you. I know we've had our differences, but I think it's time we cleared the air." I sat back in my chair, surprised by the call but not necessarily eager to have this conversation. "Jessica, this is unexpected." "I know," she said, "but I think you should know something. Kyle told me he's stepping out of our world, his life with me and my family. He's choosing his own path, and I think he made the right decision." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, she continued. "He's different now, Frank, I see it. And I'm glad he's finally realizing what matters. I know I wasn't the right person for him. I never understood him the way you do. But I think we both know he's made the right choice." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but I didn't know what to make of it. After everything that had happened, after all the tension and hurt, I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her for the role she played in pushing Kyle away. But hearing her admit that she understood his decision, that was a step. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. "But what matters now is that Kyle is on his path. He's making his choices, and I'm proud of him." She was quiet for a moment. "He's lucky to have you, Frank. He always has been." I hung up shortly after that, not because I wanted to end the conversation, but because I felt like it was finally done. The past was behind us, and the future was ahead. The wound wasn't fully healed, but it was no longer bleeding, and that was enough for me. A week later, Kyle came to me with an idea that had been brewing in his mind for a while. He wanted to start his own business, something small at first, but something that would be his. He wanted to open a workshop, a place where he could teach other young people the value of working with their hands, just like I had taught him. A place where people could come to learn a trade, to work, and to build something that mattered. I could see the excitement in his eyes as he spoke about it. It wasn't just a business plan. It was a dream. And for the first time, I could see that Kyle wasn't just following in my footsteps. He was carving his own path. "I want you to be a part of it, Dad," he said, his voice earnest. "I want to do this the right way with the right foundation, and I can't do it without you." I stood there looking at him for a long time. I had never thought about starting something like this. I had never thought about passing on the trade to others. But as I looked at him, I realized that this was what I had always wanted for him, to take what I had built and make it his own, to create something that would last, something that would matter. "I'm in," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "Let's do it." As we sat down and began to lay out the plans, I knew that this wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about making money or starting a new venture. It was about the legacy we were building together. It was about the trust we had rebuilt, the lessons learned, and the bond we had forged through years of hard work and sacrifice. For the first time, I could see the future clearly. It wasn't a future of broken dreams and lost potential. It was a future of possibility, and together, Kyle and I would build it, one step at a time.